"I'm just bait," she whispered. The rancher cut the rope and stared in horror. The sound hit first. Flies buzzing like a swarm of tiny demons circling decay. Then came the smell: sweat, hay, blood, and rot. The kind of stench that made a man's gut twist. The kind you'd remember long after you rode away. It was high summer in 1892, the kind that baked the Texas dirt until it cracked open like old bone. Out there, on the edge of Abilene, stood a half-collapsed horse stable, its timbers leaning, its roof sagging under the punishing sun. And in the shadows of that ruin was something a man wasn't meant to see. A girl, no more than 22, was bound to a rough-hewn post. Her wrists were lashed with coarse hemp rope, pulled so tight it carved raw rings into her flesh. Her arms trembled under the strain, and her knees, scraped bloody from struggling, had buckled so many times she could barely stand. One eye was swollen shut, her lips split, her cheek smeared with the red bloom of a slap. Her dress, white once, now the color of dust and dirt, was ripped at the shoulder and the thigh. She looked less like a human being and more like a warning, left here for the buzzards to learn from. She fought once. You could see it in the rope burns, in the bruises, in the defiance still smoldering behind her half-closed eyes. But the fight had drained out, replaced with that heavy kind of fear that sits on a chest until breathing feels like drowning. Her head tilted toward the doorway, her gaze fixed like a prayer. Not for God. God had abandoned this place long ago, but for anyone with the grit to step through that door. And someone did. The man's boots crunched over the packed dirt outside before his shadow fell long across the doorway. His name was Jonah McAllister, 53 years old, a rancher with a face weathered like sandstone and eyes the color of smoke. He had buried a wife, buried 2 sons, and lived long enough to feel like life was nothing but one long act of surviving what others could not. Jonah had been headed back from town with a sack of flour slung over his horse when the faint sound of crying, more like a ragged whisper, drew him off the trail. He hadn't expected to find this. He stopped cold in the doorway, his wide shoulders blocking the sun, and for a long moment, he didn't breathe. His eyes narrowed, not in cruelty, but in disbelief. He had seen lynchings. He had seen cattle rustlers shot down and left in the mud. But this was the kind of cruelty that turned a man's stomach sour. The girl stirred, lifting her head, and the tears that welled in her good eye were the stubborn kind. Tears she had tried not to shed. Jonah swallowed hard. Something inside his chest tightened. This was someone's daughter, someone's blood, and she had been left like livestock in a pen. "Hold still," Jonah muttered, his voice low, rough like gravel. He stepped inside, pulled the hunting knife from his belt, and with one clean stroke, cut the ropes that held her. Her body crumpled like a rag doll. Jonah lunged forward, catching her before she hit the dirt. Her skin burned with fever from the sun, and she shook in his arms, fragile as a foal just born. He lifted her. She weighed nothing, less than the years of grief he already carried, and carried her out to his horse. The bay stallion snorted, shifting under the sudden burden, but Jonah steadied him with a firm hand. He laid the girl across the saddle, then swung up behind her, holding her steady with one arm as he turned the horse toward the long road home. Each hoofbeat was a drum in his chest. With every mile, Jonah felt the weight of something heavier than the girl. He felt trouble riding behind him, unseen but certain. By the time they reached his ranch, dusk had painted the sky in strokes of fire and blood. and the small cabin squatted on the edge of the range, smoke curling from the chimney, the smell of old wood and leather clinging to it. Jonah dismounted, carried the girl inside, and laid her on a chair near the hearth. He filled a tin cup with water from the pump and pressed it into her trembling hands. She drank like she hadn't seen water in days, slow, careful sips that dripped down her chin. Finally, her voice came, cracked and hoarse. "My name is Lydia Harper," she whispered. Jonah nodded once. "All right, Lydia." She told him her story between gulps of water, each word dragging pain across her face. Her father, Thomas Harper, owned a stretch of land up near Archer County, rich green pastures that had caught the eye of a man named Silas Boone. Boone was the kind of man who thought money could buy land, cattle, law, even men's lives. When Thomas said no, Boone sent his wolves. They dragged Lydia from her home, beat her, tied her, and left her in that stable to rot until her father broke. She wasn't the end goal, just a pawn. A message. Jonah listened in silence, jaw clamped so hard a vein throbbed at his temple. He knew men like Boone. He'd seen their kind rise like kings, twisting the law to their liking, building empires on the backs of decent folk, too scared to fight back. But something in him shifted at Lydia's words. This wasn't just about land. It was about a young woman crushed beneath greed and a father forced to his knees. Her eyes, bruised and bloodshot, met his. Inside them was a flicker, not of fear, but of something stubborn, defiance. She had endured more pain than her years should have allowed, but she was not broken. Jonah felt the air grow heavier. By saving her, he had stepped into a storm that would not let him go. And as the firelight danced low across the cabin walls, Jonah heard it, the slow crunch of boots on dirt outside. Not the windmill, not coyotes, not cattle, men coming closer. He set the tin cup down, his hand drifting to the old Colt, resting on the table. The storm had already arrived at his doorstep. The knock never came. Men like the ones outside didn't waste time on courtesy. They let their boots speak, each step dragging slow across the dirt, meant to rattle the bones of whoever sat inside. Jonah sat in the chair by the hearth, the Colt revolver resting across his knee, his thumb brushing the worn steel as if reacquainting himself with an old friend. Lydia sat stiff in the wooden chair, her hands clutching the tin cup so tight her knuckles whitened. Her breath was shallow, and when her gaze darted toward the door, Jonah caught it. He spoke low, steady, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Don't you worry now. They'll not have you." The latch creaked. The door groaned inward. The man who stepped through first had the kind of smile that didn't touch his eyes. His name was Caleb Dyer, and Jonah recognized him at once, one of Boone's hired fists, a man who never fought fair. Caleb leaned against the frame like he owned it, hat tipped back, a toothpick shifting between his teeth. Behind him loomed two others, their shapes blotting out what little moonlight crawled over the porch. "Well, well," Caleb drawled, his grin stretching wider. "If it ain't Jonah McAllister. Folks said you'd gone soft living out here alone. Didn't think you had it in you to pick up strays." Lydia's shoulders tensed. Caleb's gaze slid over her like oil, and Jonah's jaw clenched. "She's coming with us," Caleb said. His voice was casual, but there was iron under it. "Best not to make this harder than it needs to be." Jonah rose, slow, deliberate. The Colt was steady in his hand now, pointed low but firm. "Best turn around, Caleb," Jonah said. His voice carried the weight of 53 hard years, each word dropping like a stone. "Ain't no one leaving this place tonight, 'cept in the ground if need be." The room thickened with silence. Lydia's breath caught, the crackle of the fire snapping loud as gunfire. Outside, a coyote howled, as if it too was waiting to see who would bleed first. Caleb chuckled, low and mocking. "You always were stubborn, Jonah. Boone told me you'd rather break than bend. But mark my words, you're putting your hide on the line for nothing. This girl ain't yours. She ain't worth dying for." Lydia flinched at the words, but Jonah didn't so much as blink. He'd buried enough to know the worth of a human soul wasn't measured by land deeds or bloodlines. It was measured in the fight still left inside them. And Lydia Harper had fight, no matter what Boone's wolves had done to her. The standoff snapped in a breath. Caleb lunged, his hand reaching for the iron at his hip. Jonah's revolver barked once, flame flashing bright in the cabin gloom. Caleb's hat jerked sideways as the bullet tore clean through the crown and lodged in the doorframe. He froze, eyes wide. "Next one," Jonah said coldly. "Ain't for your hat." The other two shifted, hands twitching toward their holsters, but Jonah swung the Colt across them like a whip, daring them to test him. His stance was steady, no tremor in the hand that had worked cattle, swung hammers, and buried his dead. Finally, Caleb raised both hands, slow, smirk fading into something closer to fear. He spat the toothpick onto the floor. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Boone don't take kindly to being denied." "Then let him come himself," Jonah growled. They backed out, one step at a time, until the door swung shut on the night. Silence swallowed the cabin whole. Jonah's chest rose and fell like a man who had just wrestled with death. And maybe he had. Lydia sat rigid, eyes fixed on him. The firelight painted her face in soft gold, highlighting the bruises, but beneath it all was something stronger, relief. For the first time since Jonah had found her, she looked less like prey and more like someone standing on the edge of survival. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Jonah slid the revolver back onto the table. "Yes, I did." For a moment, they said nothing more. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, as though even the wind had stopped to listen. Jonah fetched a blanket from the cot, draped it over her shoulders. She pulled it tight, shivering despite the heat of the fire. Her eyes flicked to him, searching, weighing. "You'll be in danger now," Lydia murmured. "Boone won't stop. He wants what my father owns. He'll burn through anyone in his way. That includes you." Jonah sat back, the chair groaning under his weight. He rubbed a hand across his jaw, feeling the bristle of days without shaving. "Danger's not new to me, girl," he said. His voice softened, but only slightly. "Lost my whole family once. I know what it means to have nothing left but the fight. Maybe that's why I couldn't walk past that stable today." Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, tears welled again, though she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. Jonah respected that. He respected strength, even when it wore the face of someone too young to have been broken this way. The night dragged on, each hour stretching long. Jonah kept his rifle close, sitting by the window, eyes scanning the horizon. Lydia dozed fitfully, her head tilted against the chair, the blanket cocooned around her. Outside, the prairie stretched dark and endless, dotted only by the faint glimmer of stars. Then came the sound, not boots this time, but hooves, the kind of rhythm no rancher could mistake. Horses, more than one, galloping hard across the flats. Jonah stiffened, fingers curling around the rifle's stock. He could feel it, the storm rolling closer. Lydia stirred, her voice small but sharp with fear. "Jonah?" He didn't answer, not with words. He chambered around instead, the metallic click slicing the silence in two. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where shadows began to rise from the dust. 3 riders, their silhouettes swelling with every heartbeat. This was no accident. Boone had sent more men. And this time, they weren't coming to talk. Jonah rose to his feet, the rifle heavy but sure in his hands. He turned to Lydia, his voice steady. "Stay low. Don't move till I say." She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter. As the riders drew up before the porch, torches flared in their fists, casting jagged light across the cabin walls. Their voices carried, mocking, demanding. "Send the girl out, McAllister. You got one chance." Jonah stepped onto the porch, shadow stretched long in the torchlight. He stood tall, rifle leveled, every inch the rancher who had nothing left to lose, and that made him dangerous. "This land ain't yours," he called back, his voice cutting sharp against the night. "And she ain't yours neither." The standoff stretched thin, a taut wire ready to snap. Lydia, watching from the window, pressed her hand to her mouth, heart pounding like war drums. Then one of the riders hurled a torch. It spun through the air, a streak of fire, landing in the dry hay, stacked by the corral. Flames licked high, greedy and fast. And in that moment, the fight began. The torchlight split the night like a jagged wound. Hay crackled and hissed, flames clawing upward, hungry to devour the corral. Smoke curled thick, stinging the air, a signal fire calling the whole prairie to witness. Jonah McAllister didn't flinch. His boots dug into the porch planks, rifle braced tight to his shoulder, eyes cold as stone. "Last warning, old man," one rider barked, the fire casting his scarred face in a hellish glow. "Send her out, or we'll burn you out." Jonah's voice rolled back steady, unyielding. "You'll find ashes before you find her." Then thunder split the silence, not from the sky, but from the barrel of Jonah's rifle. The lead rider jerked back, torch flying from his grip as the bullet slammed into his chest. He toppled off his horse, hitting the dirt hard, a strangled cry escaping before stillness claimed him. The second rider cursed, spurred his horse forward, pistol flashing from his belt. Jonah swung the rifle, fired again. The shot tore past the rider's hat, close enough to shear the brim clean off. The horse reared, throwing its master to the ground in a cloud of dust. The third man wheeled his horse toward the cabin, kerosene cans sloshing in one hand. Before Jonah could swing his sights, Lydia burst from the doorway. She wasn't armed with steel, only desperation and grit. In both hands she clutched a wooden beam from the hearth. With a cry, she hurled it toward the horse. The beam cracked against the beast's flank. The animal shrieked, reared high, and bucked its rider sprawling. The kerosene can clattered free, spilling across the dirt harmlessly. For a moment, the night roared with chaos. Flames, gunshots, horses thrashing. Jonah descended the steps in 3 strides, boots pounding the ground. He clubbed the butt of his rifle into the second man's skull before he could stand, dropping him unconscious. The third scrambled for his pistol, but Lydia was already there, swinging the beam again, knocking the weapon from his grip. The rider staggered back, tripping into the dirt. Jonah leveled the rifle at his chest. The man froze, chest heaving, torchlight dancing in his wide eyes. "Tell Boone," Jonah said, voice low as gravel. "Tell him if he wants her, he can come himself. And he best bring hell with him, 'cause he'll need it." The man spat blood, scrambled to his feet, and bolted into the dark, stumbling until the night swallowed him whole. Silence crashed down, broken only by the hiss of burning hay. Jonah stomped across the corral, kicked the flaming torch deeper into the dirt, and smothered the fire beneath his boots. The acrid smoke hung thick, bitter in his lungs. Behind him, Lydia stood trembling, both hands clinging to the wooden beam like it was her lifeline. Her chest rose and fell fast, her bruised face streaked with sweat and ash. Jonah looked at her, a flicker of something crossing his eyes. Not pity, but recognition. She had fire in her yet. "You did good," he said simply. Lydia blinked, startled. I just... "You stood your ground," Jonah cut her off. "That counts." Her lips trembled, but she swallowed the tears threatening to fall. She was learning, in this land, tears didn't stop bullets or torches. Fight did. Jonah tied the unconscious man to a fence post, ripping a strip of rope from the barn. Then he gathered up the one who had fallen dead, dragging him into the shadow of the corral. The firelight cast their shapes long and grim. By dawn, word would spread. Violence had a way of carrying itself across miles faster than any rider. Boone would know, and when Boone knew, the real storm would begin. Inside the cabin, Jonah set the rifle on the table, poured himself a measure of whiskey, and sat heavy in the chair. Lydia sat across from him, still gripping the blanket tight around her shoulders. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice rough. "Boone won't just send more men. He owns half the county. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, the bank in his ledger, the judge in his parlor. If he knows I'm alive. If he knows you helped me." Jonah sipped slow, eyes steady on hers. "Then he'll have to kill me to prove it." The words were plain, simple, but heavy as a coffin lid. Lydia's voice cracked. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for me? You don't even know me." Jonah leaned forward, the chair creaking. His face was carved hard, but his eyes softened, just for a moment. "Because once, a long time ago, I needed someone to stand for me. And no one did." The words silenced her. They hung in the air, heavier than smoke. Jonah didn't explain further. He didn't need to. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Jonah keeping watch, Lydia drifting into restless sleep, the crackle of the fire, their only companion. When dawn finally crawled over the horizon, painting the plains in gold, Jonah was already saddling his horse. Lydia stepped out onto the porch, the blanket trailing around her shoulders. Her face was pale, but her eyes were sharp. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Town," Jonah said, tightening the cinch. "Boone's poison runs deep, but he ain't untouchable. Folks been suffering under him too long. Time they see the truth." Lydia's jaw clenched. "You mean to drag his men in front of the sheriff?" "I mean to drag 'em in front of the people," Jonah corrected. "Law don't mean much when it's bought and paid for. But people, when they've had enough, they'll rise." He swung into the saddle, the unconscious rider slung over a second horse trailing behind. Jonah turned to Lydia. "You stay here. Keep that rifle close. If I don't come back, you ride north to your father's land. Tell him to be ready." Lydia's throat worked, but she forced herself to nod. "I won't run," she said quietly. "Not anymore." Jonah gave her a long look, then tipped his hat. With a sharp whistle, he spurred the horse forward, hooves pounding across the dirt, carrying him toward Abilene. The town woke slow, lanterns guttering out, shopkeepers sweeping dust from their steps. But as Jonah rode down the main street, dragging Boone's man behind, heads turned, eyes narrowed, murmurs rose. By the time he stopped outside the sheriff's office, a crowd was already gathering. Jonah yanked the bound man down, tossed him into the dust like a sack of grain. He pulled a packet of bills from the man's coat pocket, fresh notes stamped with Boone's bank seal, and held them high. "Here's your proof." Jonah's voice rang out, raw but strong. "Boone's buying men to steal land that ain't his. He took this girl from her home, beat her, near left her for dead, and if he'll do it to her, he'll do it to any of you." The crowd stirred, anger bubbling under their voices. A storekeeper shouted, "Boone bled me near dry with debts." A widow cried, "His men drove me off my land." Voices layered, louder, heavier. The sheriff stepped out, pale and sweating. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The tide had turned, and he was just one man against a flood. Jonah dropped the bills in the dirt, ground them under his boot. His eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and unyielding. Boone's ruled by fear long enough, but fear breaks when truth comes to light. So I ask you plain, will you stand or will you bow? The crowd roared, fists raised, faces hard. For the first time in years, the town was no longer afraid. And somewhere, at the edge of that rising storm, Silas Boone sat in his fine house on the hill, sipping whiskey, unaware that the ground beneath him was about to crack wide open. The sound in town was different now. It wasn't the lazy chatter of merchants hawking goods, nor the shuffle of cattle hands drifting toward the saloon. It was sharper, heavier, a current of voices that carried anger, long buried and now rising like dust on the wind. Jonah McAllister stood at the center of it, boots planted in the dirt, rifle still slung across his shoulder. The outlaw he'd dragged behind his horse lay bound in the street, groaning faintly. Beside him, the packet of Boone's bank-marked bills rested trampled in the mud, damning evidence no lawman could deny. The sheriff, sweat dripping down his ruddy face, shifted nervously on the porch of his office. His star badge caught the morning light, but the shine did little to hide the truth. He was a man cornered. He opened his mouth, but the words died under the rising roar of the crowd. "Boone's bled us all dry," a storekeeper shouted, his fists shaking in the air. "Every debt, every crooked deal, it all traces back to him." "He took my husband's ranch," a widow cried, her face streaked with dust and tears. "Drove me and my boys into the dirt while he sat fat in that big house." Others joined in, voices from every corner of the town. The blacksmith spoke of iron shipments seized by Boone's riders. The barkeep cursed the whiskey taxes Boone had forced upon him. What had begun as murmurs now swelled into a wave of fury, crashing over the square with unstoppable force. Jonah didn't smile. His face remained carved in stone, but his eyes flickered as he watched. He hadn't come here to lead a revolt, but the truth had a way of sparking fires no one man could contain. Boone's empire of fear was cracking, and the cracks were spreading. The sheriff raised his hands weakly, trying to shout over the din. "Now, folks, let's not do something we'll regret. Justice'll be handled proper." "Proper?" A ranch hand spat in the dirt. "You've been sitting in Boone's pocket so long you forgot what proper is." The crowd surged closer, and the sheriff stumbled back, his voice swallowed by the anger of his people. Jonah stepped forward then, his voice deep and carrying. "Listen here." His words rolled like thunder, pulling every ear toward him. "I didn't ride into town to stir blood. I came with proof. Proof Boone's behind the taking of Lydia Harper. Proof he's after her father's land. And if he'll strike at one ranch, he'll strike at all." He bent, yanked the outlaw up by his collar, and shoved him to his knees for all to see. The man spat mud, his eyes wild, but Jonah's grip was iron. "Tell him," Jonah growled. "Tell him who paid you." The outlaw sneered, then broke into bitter laughter. "Boone! Who else? Man owns every man worth owning in this county. You think this little show'll stop him? You think a crowd can bring down a king?" The words stirred the people further. Some shouted in rage, others cursed Boone's name. The sheriff, pale as a ghost, slipped back into his office, his courage crumbling with every heartbeat. Jonah released the outlaw, letting him slump in the dirt. Then he turned to the crowd again. "Boone thinks he's king," Jonah said, his voice hard as the steel he carried. "But kings only stand when their people kneel. If you're done bending your backs, then rise. Rise and show him he don't own you." A roar answered him, raw, furious, unafraid. For the first time in years, the people of Abilene stood taller, their fear burned away by the fire of truth. By noon, word had traveled beyond the town square. Riders carried it out to the ranches, to the homesteads, scattered across the plains. Boone's name was cursed from one end of the county to the other. His power, once as steady as iron, now trembled on the edge of collapse. And in his mansion on the hill, Silas Boone felt it. He stood before tall windows, whiskey glass in hand, staring down at the town below. From this vantage, he'd always felt untouchable, looking down on the people he owned, secure behind walls built with their sweat. But today, even from here, he could hear it, the rumble of anger rolling up from the streets. A man entered, Boone's foreman, Hale Riker, a brute of a man with shoulders like oxen and eyes cold as steel. He tipped his hat, but his jaw was tight. "Jonah McAllister stirred the pot," Riker reported. "Dragged one of our boys through the dirt, laid it all out in front of the people. Town's turning." Boone's face darkened, a vein throbbing at his temple. "McAllister," he spat, as though the name itself tasted foul. "Old fool's been a thorn in my side long enough. Should have crushed him years ago." Riker shifted, uneasy. "Folk are riled, sir. If we move heavy-handed now—" Boone cut him off with a slam of his glass against the mantel, shattering it. Whiskey splattered across the stone. "Then we crush harder," Boone roared. "If they want a war, we'll give 'em one. I didn't buy this land to lose it to a pack of dirt farmers and a broken-down rancher." Riker's eyes flickered. He was a hard man, but even he knew the tide was shifting. Still, he nodded. "What are your orders?" Boone's lip curled into a sneer. "Bring McAllister to me, alive if you can, dead if you must, and burn his damn ranch to the ground. Let the girl watch." Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, not from the sky, but from hooves. Boone's riders were gathering, more than before, armed and ready. Back at the McAllister ranch, Lydia stood on the porch, eyes fixed on the horizon. Her hands tightened on the rifle Jonah had left her, knuckles white against the wood. She could feel it coming, the storm, the reckoning. And for the first time since her capture, she wasn't just afraid. She was ready. Jonah, riding back from town, saw the smoke of his own corral still smudging the sky. He knew Boone would come for him, and soon. The weight of it pressed on him, but he didn't bow. He had nothing left to lose. Boone, on the other hand, had everything, and the people, those who had once been silent, were no longer quiet. The West had seen its share of blood. It would see more before this was done. The sun dipped low, bleeding red across the horizon. Jonah McAllister rode back toward his ranch with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who already knew the storm was waiting. His horse snorted, uneasy, catching the scent of smoke still drifting from the corral. Jonah's hand rested on the rifle laid across his saddle, his jaw tight. He'd stared death in the face more times than he could count, but tonight felt different. Tonight wasn't just his fight. It was hers too. When he crested the final rise, he saw her. Lydia stood on the porch, rifle in her hands, the blanket gone now. She wasn't hiding behind anything anymore. The bruises still marked her face, but her stance was steady, her gaze fixed on the horizon as though she could already see Boone's riders coming. Jonah swung down, his boots hitting the dirt, heavy. She met him halfway, her eyes sharp, searching his face. "What happened in town?" she asked. Jonah studied her, the rifle balanced easy in his hand. "Truth's out. Folks are stirred. Boone's throne's crackin', but he won't sit quiet while it falls." Lydia swallowed hard. "Then he's coming." Jonah nodded. "With all he's got." The air between them thickened, filled with the kind of silence that says more than words. Jonah could see it in her. The fear still there, but buried now under something stronger. Resolve. She wasn't the same broken girl he'd cut loose from the stable post. Boone had tried to break her spirit. Instead, he'd forged it harder. Jonah moved to the corral, checking the horses, tightening straps, laying out what little ammunition he had left. Lydia followed, watching his hands. "What if we run?" she asked softly. Jonah's eyes flicked up, locking on hers. "Run where?" "Boone's reach don't end at county lines. A man like him don't stop hunting till he's put you in the ground." Lydia's throat worked, but she nodded. "Then we make our stand." Jonah gave her a long look, measuring, weighing, and finally gave a single nod. "Then we make our stand." They spent the hours before dusk turning the ranch into a fortress. Jonah hammered planks across windows, stacked barrels for cover, set lanterns where the light would blind an enemy trying to sneak through the dark. Lydia carried what she could, her body still sore, but her will unbending. At one point, Jonah caught her struggling with a crate too heavy, her arms trembling. He moved to take it, but she shook her head, teeth gritted, and pushed until it was set in place. "You don't need to prove nothing," Jonah said quietly. Her answer was sharp. "Yes, I do." Jonah let it stand. As twilight deepened, the first distant thunder rolled. Not from the sky, but from hooves. Jonah and Lydia stood side by side on the porch, staring into the gathering dark. The sound grew heavier, closer, until shadows moved at the far edge of the prairie. Torches flared, dozens this time, their flames bobbing like the eyes of demons. Jonah exhaled slow, lifted the rifle. "He's bringing his whole damn pack." Lydia tightened her grip on her weapon, her face pale but set. "Then we fight." The riders spread wide, encircling the ranch, their shouts carrying across the night. Jonah counted at least 20, too many for one man and one girl, but numbers didn't matter. Not tonight. From the center rode Silas Boone himself. He was a broad-shouldered man in a black coat, his beard trimmed neat, his hat cocked with arrogance. His horse was a fine bay, its tack silvered, gleaming in the torchlight. Boone pulled up just beyond rifle range, his voice booming. "Jonah McAllister," he called. "You've made yourself a fool standing in my way. That girl is mine. Her land is mine. And by God, your ranch will be mine before this night is done." Jonah stepped forward into the torchlight, his rifle leveled steady. "You're wrong, Boone. Ain't nothing yours but the fear you bought. And fear don't last." The crowd of riders jeered, torches waving. Boone sneered. "You think one tired old rancher and a broken girl can stop me?" Jonah's answer was calm, steady. Not just us. Them too. He jerked his head toward the horizon. Boone turned and saw lights. Dozens of lanterns moving across the plains, carried by townsfolk who had followed Jonah from Abilene. Farmers with pitchforks, blacksmiths with hammers, ranchers with old shotguns, all walking shoulder to shoulder, their anger burning brighter than Boone's torches. The riders shifted uneasily, their circle breaking as the glow grew stronger. Boone's sneer faltered. "You stirred up sheep," he spat. "They'll scatter soon as blood's drawn." Jonah's eyes didn't waver. "Maybe. But tonight, Boone, they ain't sheep. Tonight, they're wolves." The standoff stretched, crackling like dry timber before a blaze. Then Boone raised his hand. His riders spurred forward, a wave of hooves and fire crashing toward the ranch. Jonah fired first. The shot cracked like thunder, dropping a rider from his saddle. The townsfolk roared, rushing forward to meet the charge. Lydia raised her rifle, the kick slamming her shoulder as a rider fell. The night exploded. Gunfire, shouts, the clash of steel, the cries of horses. Smoke and fire tangled in the air. Jonah fought like a man with death already written, each shot placed with cold precision. Lydia stayed at his side, her hands trembling, but her aim true. The people of Abilene, once broken by fear, surged like a tide, pushing Boone's men back yard by yard. Boone himself rode at the front, his pistol spitting fire, his face twisted with rage. His voice rose above the din, promising death to any who stood against him. But the tide had turned. For every rancher who fell, 2 more stepped forward, their courage unshaken. Jonah reloaded, smoke curling around him, his chest heaving. His eyes found Boone through the chaos. The Baron sat tall in the saddle, fury burning in his eyes. Jonah raised his rifle, aimed and fired. The shots sang true. Boone's hat flew, grazed by the bullet, but the man stayed mounted. Boone roared, spurred his horse, and charged straight for Jonah. The battle wasn't over. It had only just reached its heart. Boone's charge was a black storm tearing through the night, his stallion pounding the dirt, eyes wild, hooves striking sparks. His pistol flared, spitting fire, each shot cracking the air. Jonah McAllister stood his ground, rifle raised, heart steady. He'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. The moment when all the grief, the silence, the years of loss would meet a face and a name. He fired. The shot slammed into Boone's shoulder, jerking him sideways in the saddle. But the man didn't fall. Boone was built on stubbornness and hate, and both kept him upright. He roared, firing back, the bullet screaming past Jonah's ear, close enough to tear his hat brim. Jonah rolled sideways, reloading with practiced hands. Lydia cried out from the porch, firing her rifle, the muzzle flash lighting her bruised face. The shot struck Boone's stallion in the flank. The beast shrieked, rearing high, and Boone was thrown, crashing into the dirt with a thud that rattled the ground. The battle around them surged, townsfolk and outlaws colliding in smoke and chaos. But for Jonah and Boone, the world had narrowed to 2 men and the space between them. Boone dragged himself up, his fine coat torn, blood seeping from his shoulder. His pistol gleamed under the torchlight, still loaded, still hungry. Jonah leveled his rifle again, but before he could fire, Boone lunged, too close now. The rifle barrel slammed aside, and both men crashed together into the dirt. It was fists now, raw and brutal. Boone's knuckles split Jonah's lip, blood spraying across his beard. Jonah hammered back, feeling ribs crack beneath his blows. They rolled in the dust, snarling, cursing. the kind of fight where only one man leaves breathing. Boone's hand found Jonah's throat, squeezing, choking the air from him. Jonah's vision blurred, stars bursting in his eyes. He clawed at Boone's grip, but the Baron was strong, rage giving him power. Then came Lydia's shout. "Jonah!" It cut through the haze, sharp as lightning. Boone's eyes flicked up just for a heartbeat, and that was all Jonah needed. He slammed his head forward, skull meeting Boone's nose with a sickening crack. Boone reeled back, howling, clutching his face. Jonah staggered to his knees, seized a rock from the dirt, and brought it down across Boone's pistol hand. Bones shattered. The weapon fell. Boone screamed, clutching his ruined hand. Jonah grabbed his rifle, rising slow, blood dripping from his lip. He stood over Boone, the barrel aimed square at the man's chest. Boone froze, eyes wide, the arrogance draining away, replaced by something he had never known before: fear. Around them, the battle was ending. Boone's men, outnumbered and broken, fled into the night. The townsfolk pressed forward, lanterns high, voices raised. Some shouted for blood, others for mercy. Boone spat, blood staining his teeth. "You think you've won? I own this county. I own its law, its land, its people. Kill me, and another will rise in my place. Men like me don't fall." Jonah's finger tightened on the trigger. For a heartbeat, it seemed the world would end in that gunshot. Then Jonah lowered the rifle. "No," he said, voice rough but steady. "Men like you don't fall. They get dragged down." He seized Boone by the collar, yanked him up, and shoved him forward into the waiting crowd. Hands caught him, rough, angry hands that had been waiting years for this moment. Boone thrashed, roared, cursed, but the people didn't let go. They dragged him down the street, through the town he had ruled by fear, past the sheriff who stood silent, stripped of authority. Boone's screams faded beneath the voices of the many, voices no money could silence. By dawn, Boone was gone. Whether he lived or died didn't matter. What mattered was that his rule was broken, his name no longer spoken in fear. Jonah stood apart, leaning heavy on his rifle, chest heaving, every bone in his body aching. Lydia came to him, her steps slow, her face pale, but eyes burning bright. "You spared him," she said softly. Jonah spat blood into the dirt. "Wasn't mine to kill, was theirs." She nodded, her throat tight. For a long while, they stood in silence, watching the sun climb over the plains, washing the land in light. When Lydia's father arrived hours later, his wagon rolling hard across the dirt, the air shifted. Thomas Harper leapt down before the horses had stopped, his face carved deep with sleepless nights. His eyes found his daughter, and in the next instant she was in his arms, sobbing into his chest. Jonah turned away, giving them space, his own chest tightening. He'd buried his family long ago, but seeing theirs restored made something deep inside him ache and ease at once. Thomas finally approached, his hand extended. "I owe you more than I can say, McAllister." Jonah shook his hand, the grip firm, rough, filled with a gratitude words couldn't carry. When the wagon was ready to leave, Lydia climbed aboard. She turned, her eyes lingering on Jonah. They were softer now, filled with something more than thanks, something unspoken. Jonah tipped his hat, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. In the silence, there was more weight than words could carry. The wagon rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Jonah watched until it was gone, the plains stretching empty again. He stood alone on his porch, rifle across his knees, the quiet settling heavy. The West had always been cruel, but sometimes justice didn't come with a judge's gavel. Sometimes it came from men and women who had finally had enough. Jonah looked at the rising sun, its light spilling across the broken land. "Maybe," he murmured, "there's still something worth standing for." The wind carried his words across the plains, and in the silence that followed, it felt like the land itself agreed.